What up, y'all? So I'm reading this book called Range, and it says why generalists triumph in a specialized world. Okay, so I found this as a curb alert. People leave stuff on the curb, and I saw this book, and I grabbed it, and I was just going to leave it, but then I read the inside front cover right over here, and it piqued my interest. So it just talks about plenty of experts argue that anyone who wants to develop a skill, play an instrument, or lead their field should start early, focus intensely, and rack up as many hours of deliberate practice as possible. If you dabble or delay, you'll never catch up to the people who got a head start. So that piqued my interest, because that's what we hear about, the 10,000 hour rule, all that kind of thing. And it says, but a closer look at research on the world's top performers, from professional athletes to Nobel laureates, shows that early specialization is the exception, not the rule. So the majority of experts and, sports greats start late. They don't start, not like super late, but they start, they don't start from when they're super young. Like a Tiger Woods. Basically, this talks about Tiger Woods, Roger Federer in the introduction, and it talks about how Tiger Woods started before he was 1 year old, holding a golf club, and he became, the best there ever was. So, but those are the stories that we see. Those are the stories that we remember. Those are the stories that we know. We don't really hear about the late specialization. We always hear about the hyper specialization, and hyper specialization basically is extreme focus and many hours spent on one activity or sport. So it's like an opposite of variety. You're just sticking to one thing, hyper specialization. Then you have late specialization, which is the majority of elite athletes pick their sport of choice later rather than sooner. So late specialization as opposed to hyper specialization. But anyway, it says David Epstein examined the world's most successful athletes, artists, musicians, inventors, forecasters, and scientists. He discovered that in most fields, especially those that are complex and unpredictable, generalists, not specialists, are primed to excel. Generalists often find their path late, and they juggle many interests rather than focusing on one. They are more creative, more agile, and able to make connections their more specialized peers can't see. Okay, so generalists, and you see how he says, especially those that are complex and unpredictable. And they talk about that also in the introduction and the first chapter. It talks about kind environments, kind learning environments, which is basically like chess, firefighting, just these different areas where if you specialize in one thing, you could specialize in one thing and you become really great. Whereas most other things that people are interested are like complex, and there's it's just changing rules. Sometimes there's no rules. It's just like basically like life is like there's no rules, and it always changes. And when you're not hyper specialized, you're able to adapt better. When you're late, when you specialize late, as opposed to hyper specialize. So the majority of things in this world are it's not called kind environment. It's called what was it called? Kind learning environment. Experience and recognizing patterns leads to expertise. Golf, chess, firefighting, deliberate practice. Okay, so these are kind learning environments where experience and recognizing patterns will make you an expert. And then you have wicked learning environments, which is like life. Okay, rules often unclear or incomplete, no repetitive patterns or not obvious, feedback delayed. So there you have it. The reason why it's better to be late specializing than hyper specialized in something. So anyway, I wrote down some notes, and I was just gonna talk about a little bit of the what they were talking about in the book, because it's really interesting. So I talked about late specialization. Okay, he started talking about this a German soccer team, and they won the World Cup. And when they did a study, they found out that the majority of the players didn't play soccer above amateur league until after age 22. So that's like really late when it comes to sports. I mean, they played soccer, but they never played anything above amateur league until after age 22. So obviously, if you're doing amateur, you're probably not spending as many hours. But it talked about that too. Like Tiger Woods obviously spent hours and hours, and the 10,000 hour rule worked with him because golf is a kind learning environment. And when you have experience and there are patterns that you can notice, like the wind and the way you swing and the way the club face hits the ball is like a pattern, and you could perfect those patterns, and you could become an expert. um, so soccer is not a kind learning environment. It is to a certain extent, but basically it's saying like a lot of these players, many of the players didn't start playing above amateur until after age 22. And they talked about how Roger Federer, he was like one of the best ever, if one of the best. I don't know if he may be the best tennis player ever, but his mom was a tennis coach. But he did all kind of different sports. He didn't just stick to um, so Roger Federer's path to sports stardom is far more prevalent than the Tiger path. um, So yeah, he just played all these different sports, and it wasn't until in his teens where he was like, okay, I'm going to start focusing on uh, on tennis. And obviously he started spending a lot of hours. Obviously, when they pick it, they end up spending a lot of hours on it. But in the beginning, their path is very diverse, and they're doing all these different things. And it's better because you're more prepared to handle different things. Okay, you have the boxer Lomachenko. Okay, they talked about him in the book, and they said he was the youngest title holder in 3 different weight classes. So he was the youngest to ever do it, and he took 4 years off of boxing when he was young to practice Ukrainian dance, to do all these other things. So he took 4 years off of boxing to do all these dancing and, you know, all these other types of sports and different types of things. And he says basically that he said that it really helped him with his footwork, doing the dancing. And that wasn't the purpose of doing it, but it made him more well-rounded, basically. So when you have a more diverse upbringing and interests, you're more well-rounded to handle adversity when you're in your actual sport, or just whatever you're doing, your career or whatever. Okay, so inventors and creators increased their creative impact by accumulating experience in different domains. Okay, many times highly credentialed experts can become so narrow-minded that they actually get worse with experience. And that kind of makes sense, because if you think about it, like when you do something so many times over and over and over and over, you kind of just go on autopilot, and you're not like thinking about any issue that's going to pop up, or problems that will arise. You're just kind of going through the motions. It gets kind of boring and monotonous, and 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 then the people who come in, or who aren't as experienced, actually sometimes do better in different situations, and are able to handle diversity and problems that arise better than the people who have been doing it for so long. Okay, I mean, I used to work at the monorail. I lived in Las Vegas, and I worked at the monorail there. They would hire previous military, and so I was working there, and I was in the control room, and the I was watching for alarms in the system. Okay, now there was a broken alarm, and the alarm would go off like every couple minutes, and then you just have to click it, like, okay, acknowledging that you saw that there was an alarm. And so apparently one morning I come in, and they're like, hey, someone went and walked from one station to the other. They opened the door was open, that led out to the track, and they walked all the way from one station to the next. And you were working, and the alarm went off, and you didn't, say anything about it. You didn't notice, whatever. But I was so used to seeing that false alarm that I just assumed that the alarm that went off was the false alarm, and I just acknowledged it without actually seeing what it was. So basically that's saying, like, basically if someone was like new, came in there and was new, they probably would have noticed that, but I had been there for a while. So it was so monotonous, and it was just like, just clicking it, that I just got so used to it that I made a mistake and I got let go. I got fired. But yeah, basically, people who are hyper specialized in something sometimes can do a worse job than people who are have a more diverse background. Okay, so that was learning is best done slower to accumulate lasting knowledge, even if it means performing poorly on a test of immediate progress. Youth sports league, when people believe hyper-specialization is the only way to success. I don't know what I was thinking there, but anyway, that was all in the introduction, and now this is chapter 1, and it's called The Cult of the Head Start, and it talks about Laszlo Polgar, who was like, okay, if I have kids, I'm going to, make them very successful, and they're going to be hyper specialized, and they're going to just be focused on this one thing. So him and his wife chose chess, and he had 3 daughters, and it actually ended up working because chess is a kind learning environment activity. So, when you're able to, if with chess, when you start young and you're able to recognize patterns, and you get you're hyper specialized, it's going to work. So his daughters were super successful. They were the first in a lot of areas when it came to chess for women, and a lot of rules were changed because of this guy's daughters. But yeah, so all 3 became amazing champions. The Polar method claimed all children should be hyper specialized, and the world's problems would be, taken care of. But that's obviously not the case, because that only works in kind of learning environments. It doesn't necessarily work in like all of life and all of life's problems. The more chaotic, the more wicked the learning environment is, the better it is to not be hyper specialized and to have a diverse background, because you're ready for anything that could pop up, because you're used to a lot of different things as opposed to just this one thing. Okay, so we talked about the kind learning environment, the wicked learning environment. Even with chess and firefighting, with a change in the status quo, the intuition and skill could disappear. So even in kind learning environments, when something changes, when something is out of the ordinary, these, experts, find it more difficult to, move forward and to win, and, that kind of thing. Okay, so, yeah. So that was chapter 1. Okay, so in 1997, an AI defeated, they created an artificial intelligence chess player that beat Garry Kasparov, a grandmaster chess champion. So chess is a kind learning environment, and it's one with tactics and strategy. Okay, but tactics are the most important. So if you learn anything, the tactics are the most important. And tactics are short combinations of moves players use to get an early advantage. So a strategy is how to manage the little battles to set up to win the war. Okay, but when you get an advantage in the beginning with the tactics, that usually leads to a win. So with excellent tactics and subpar strategies, you can still be great and you can still be, the best, basically. Okay, now AI, artificial intelligence, can process many times the tactics that humans can. Hence why they can easily defeat humans, because they could, process probably millions of tactics, whereas a human can only manage a certain amount of tactics. Okay, so then after this happened, then they started doing these other chess games where it was like human and AI together versus strictly AI, or versus another team of humans and AI, and they're called centaurs. Okay, these AI human combination teams are called centaurs, which are human and computer teams, and they're always able to beat solo computers because the computer handles the tactics and the humans are able to focus on strategy. Um, since tactics are taken out of the equation, amateur players with computers are able to easily defeat grandmaster and computer centaur teams. So uh, not only do do centaur teams with beat computers, but centaur teams with amateur humans are able to beat grandmaster centaur teams, because sometimes the amateur player is better at strategy than the grandmaster. So that's what they were saying, when you change the status quo, it makes it more difficult. It makes it more hard for these grandmasters to deal with it, because they're so hyper specialized in tactics that they're unable to cope with the changes, whereas an amateur who has a diverse background, some of them like playing strategy video games, strategy board games, they're able to use that knowledge, and with a diverse background, they're able to win. When it changes from a kind learning environment to a more wicked learning environment, the people with the diverse background, or they do a lot better. Okay, amateur players who have a diverse background, including being excellent at strategy games. Okay, so also they talk about chunking, and so what they realized was like these kind learning environments, these grandmasters, these people who know all the tactics, they could see a chessboard, the certain positions of all the pieces, and they could recreate it. They could recreate it on the board. They could see it for a few seconds and then recreate it on the board. Whereas obviously an amateur player or just a person who doesn't even play chess would never be able to do it. And at first, back in the day, like the 60s or the 70s or even the 40s, I think they thought that it was just they had memorization skills, when that wasn't the case. It was just more like they were able to see patterns, chunks. They were able to see chunks on the board with different patterns, and they were able to remember the chunks, the patterns of chunks. So it's the same thing they figured with savants. Okay, so apparently like 60-70% of savants are autistic, or maybe it's half and half, I don't remember. But there was this person who could play music, like any music. He could play hundreds of songs from heart, from his mind. He could just play hundreds of songs, right? So what they did this experiment with the chess players, and then they put the pieces where it doesn't make sense where they could be, and then they showed the chess player, and the chess player, the grandmasters and the experts, they weren't able to put it on the board, and that's how they figured out that it's chunking. It's not actual memorization. Same thing with this musician being able to play hundreds of songs. They would show him, or let him listen to an arrangement, and he'd be able to play it. And I forgot what exactly it was called, but a certain type of music, right? Where it's like same patterns, like similar patterns of everything else. But then when they would play this savant music that had weird patterns, and it was just like all over the place, something he wasn't used to, he was unable to play it. So with these two experiments, they were able to figure out that it's chunking of patterns as opposed to memorization. Because at first they thought that, oh, he memorized all these songs. Oh, he memorized all these, chess moves. But that's not the case. It's called chunking. So where's, oh yeah. Okay. So if we did chunking, kind learning environments that from the untrained eye seems like a photographic memory, but in reality just rapid pattern recognition. So that's what it is, the rapid pattern recognition. Chess players, waiters, like waiters, they could remember your order, like everything you ordered. Musicians, quarterbacks. With savants, it's the same thing. Musicians, artists can reproduce things with familiar patterns easily, but make many mistakes when it's something unfamiliar. So that's what it is. So in kind working environments, AI excels, but in wicked learning environments, AI is not the greatest. Okay, in a truly open world, problem uh, devoid of rigid rules, devoid of rigid rules and reams of perfect historical data, AI has been disastrous. So I think they were talking about an AI where they were like, okay, we're going to predict how many people are going to have the flu next year. And it was like way off. It like overestimated big time. So they kind of like put a kibosh or caboose or whatever on AI when it comes to certain things like that, because when there's not a strict set of rules, it's harder for AI to deal with. Whereas humans, we have such a diverse background, and we have something different that we're able to be better as of now than AI when it comes to learning environments. AI processing is like savants. They need stable structures and narrow worlds. Narrow specialization in an unkind domain can be disastrous. Expert firefighters making major mistakes in unfamiliar situations. So they're so used to these different things. How to know when the building's going to crumble, knowing all these different things, where the smoke's going, and they're able to make these rapid decisions. But if they're in an unfamiliar situation, sometimes they make big mistakes, and it could be very disastrous. Okay, I don't know if this is true, but I put Western education focuses on kind learning skills. It doesn't really prepare people for, um, you know, wicked learning environments, which is more beneficial, I think, for people. And I say, which turns most people into losers, especially those with no support structure at home. Okay, the world is not a kind learning environment. There are no rules, and things are constantly changing. So even if you figure something out, everything changes. Okay, now they talked about cognitive entrenchment, and that's when rules are changed. Experts in any career find it more difficult to adapt to newbies, and that's what I was talking about earlier. So that's cognitive entrenchment. They get stuck in their ways, and they don't. When something new arises, it's harder for them to change. And it says the solution is to vary challenges within a domain drastically and insist on having one foot outside of your world. Like mix it up, so you're not so hyper specialized and hyper focused on one thing that you lose sight of the forest for the trees or whatever. Okay, so compared to other scientists, Nobel laureates are at least 22 times more likely to partake as an amateur actor, dancer, magician, or other performer. Nationally recognized scientists are more likely to be musicians, sculptors, painters, actors, singers. The list goes on and on. Like, apparently. So a lot of nationally recognized scientists like dabble in a lot of different things. The more successful experts belong to the wider world. Um, okay, so this was a Nobel laureate, a Spanish Nobel laureate, and this is a quote for him, and I really liked it, so I wrote it down. It says, "To him who observes them from afar." So uh, somebody seeing, these people from afar, to him who observes them from afar, it appears as though they are scattering and dissipating their energies, while in reality they are channeling and strengthening them. Spanish Nobel laureate Santiago Ramon y Cajal, father of modern neuroscience. Okay, this genius is basically like, put it all in a nutshell. From afar, someone watching, it looks like, man, this person's scattered, and this person, is just wasting energy. When in reality, doing all kind of different things and having a diverse background is actually beneficial. Okay. Rather than obsessively focusing on a narrow topic, creative achievers tend to have broad interests. Okay. Okay, this is interesting right here. Okay, Claude Shannon. Okay, he was an electrical engineer. He went to the University of Michigan. Okay, and for one of the prerequisites, he had to take a philosophy course. Okay, so this guy Claude Shannon had to take a philosophy course, and he was fascinated by this guy George Boole. Okay, Boole. He was fascinated with this logician. Okay, a guy who's expert in logic. Okay, um, so this expert logician, George Boole, basically assigned a number 1 for true and a 0 for false. And he says logic problems could be solved with mathematics. Okay, so 70 years after Boole died, the logician who created this 1-0 system to use mathematics to solve logic problems, this guy Claude Shannon, who is an engineer, took an internship at AT&T Bell Lab Research, and he combined telephone call routing technology with Boole's logic system, the zeros and the ones, to encode and transmit any type of information electronically. Okay, without that insight, computers wouldn't exist. Okay, so Shannon went on to say, no one was familiar with both those fields at the same time. That is crazy. Computers wouldn't exist if Shannon wouldn't have had to take this philosophy course. So he took this course that was way outside of what he wanted to do, and he learned about this ones and zeros and solving logic with ones and zeros, and he took it into his. But if he was never forced to take that philosophy class, would we even have computers? Would I even be on this phone? Who knows? I don't know. Maybe not, at least not yet. You know, so so basically that is just another example of having a diverse background. Changes the world. Basically, okay. I just thought that story was so cool. Okay, Christopher Connolly had a psychology consulting firm in the UK to help higher achievers perform their best. Connolly returned to school to do a PhD to find out why only a small amount of professionals were adept at expanding their careers, like a classical musician, like opening up his own composing school or his own orchestra or whatever. Okay, so he found that broader training and he found that these people who were able to expand beyond what they were doing and advance, that they had a broader training and kept multiple career streams open even as they pursued a primary specialty. So even when they were pursuing their primary specialty, they were doing all these other things. They were doing all these other diverse things. They traveled on an 8-lane highway, he said. rather than a single lane, one-way street, which is what a lot of people do. They're hyper specialized. Okay. They avoided cognitive entrenchment. Okay. Their skill was avoiding the same old patterns. In the wicked world with ill-defined challenges and few rigid rules, range can be a life hack. Okay, so it's a wicked learning environment, the world, and when you have a range, or when you have a lot of range, that could be a life hack because it'll help you in situations when you have knowledge from all areas, you know. So a few of the, that's pretty much it, but there were a few other little extra things. Duke Ellington avoided music lessons to focus on drawing and baseball. Lomachenko, who was the boxer, gymnastics, basketball, football, tennis, enhanced footwork for boxing. Tom Brady was drafted into pro baseball before football, which I didn't know, which is pretty interesting. A diverse background equals more well-rounded. I wrote that down. Okay, so the conclusion. In conclusion, another thing that so this is like another thing that's hammered into our heads that's not exactly true. Okay, whether it's to make more money or because the stories are more exciting or that they purposefully want to limit our potential or people's potential or possibly even that it's a conspiracy to keep people focused on passion instead of the more important factor of improvement. There definitely does seem to be a big push to get people to believe hyper specializing is the way to success. Okay, who knows why they push so hard this hyper specialization when the opposite is true? There's a lot of theories, I'm sure. Okay, so maybe it's a combination of all those things. Being aware and realizing what's really going on is the first step toward a better life. Okay, so that was an interesting introduction and first chapter. I'm going to continue reading it, and I will let you know how the rest goes. But let me know what you guys think about the hyper specialization versus late specialization. Are you a hyper specialized? Are you late? Did you practice late specialization? Are you an expert? Do you feel like this makes sense? Do you feel like it's true? Do you feel like it's false? Why or why not? But I feel like it's probably true, and the reason why probably is because, like I said, I like to say I have 99 hustles, and I do all kind of different things. So obviously, I want it to be true because that's kind of how I am. So it gets me excited to think like, oh yeah, well, I do all kind of different things. Maybe one day I will be successful. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care. Have a good day. See you next time.